We should be in for a treat, because what I got for you today is a super high level match of Zerg versus Terran. Spawning here in the top right corner of Sky Garden, playing with the red Zerg drones, we have none other than soO. And his opponent spawning on the other side of the map, playing with the blue Terran SCVs, he goes by the nickname of INnoVation. Now, both of these players are qualified for the BlizzCon finals coming up in just a couple of weeks. Essentially, over the course of 2017, they have accumulated enough points or seeded themselves into the tournament, which means that they are some of the very best players on the planet. And as a matter of fact, my favorite to take it all to become their new world champion of StarCraft 2 is most definitely INnoVation. The guy is an absolute monster. He's been dominating for years, and I don't really think that there is a whole lot of dispute whether or not he's the most dominant StarCraft 2 player of all time. I mean, he's been around since, I think, like 2012 or so, and he's really been winning tournaments left and right ever since. Just recently, he ended up winning the GSO Code S, essentially, outside of maybe BlizzCon, the highest level, of StarCraft 2 that you can find, and the guy is an absolute monster. Now, usually his weakness is the fact that he plays very, very predictable. He plays the same strategy almost every single game. He just simply makes a lot of stuff. Now, of course, a lot of people have tried cheesing him because he is so very predictable. He usually doesn't really cheese himself very often, although, of course, he is perfectly capable of doing so. But INnoVation just simply doesn't seem to die. And after you, execute your all-in, he just ends up with so much more stuff than other players have been able to, that he is just simply, while predictable, very, very, very powerful. Now, soO, on the other hand, and it's kind of sad in a way, I think that if he would have won every single grand finals that he managed to, qualify himself for, I think he would have been undoubtedly considered to be the best player on the planet as well. soO, more so than any other player in StarCraft 2 ever, has earned a ton of second places. It's almost sad in a way, because the guy is so very good, and I really desperately want him to be, the victor of BlizzCon this year, because it is well deserved. But soO seems to have a bit of a mental block when he makes it to the grand finals. Nevertheless, though, he's one of the scariest players on the planet. He doesn't really miss a beat. His defensive play in particular is very, very impressive, and while they both really have similar playstyles, I mean, both of these players in this match right here like their macro-based styles, it is usually going to be the Terran player in the Zerg versus Terran matchup that will try and slow down the Zerg. Now, soO, he's usually the player that doesn't really take any damage from that whatsoever, so we should be in for a treat right here, because I think that this is going to be a very, very high level match. Now, we are indeed on the map called Sky Garden, and Sky Garden is one of the maps that got quite far into the Team Liquid map contest. I haven't actually checked exactly what the stance of that tournament currently is and what the current rankings are, but regardless, Sky Garden is one of the maps that's currently being considered for the next ladder map pool in StarCraft 2, and in order to decide whether or not a map is good enough, of course, a bunch of pro gamers need to play on this map as well, and so far I've seen a couple of matches on this map. It seems very solid. Now, the fact of the matter is that there are a ton of different bases on this map. There's a gold base right here in the center, as well as, of course, on the opposite side of the map right here, too. And even though these players aren't quite spawning in the cross locations, they are still spawning rather far away from each other. And even though a Zerg would probably prefer having a little bit more wiggle room and, crossing or spawning in the cross positions is usually the preference for the Zerg, he does have a huge chunk of the map here to essentially all take for himself, because it's going to be a tough one to harass if you are the Terran player in this game. So far, though, very, very standard play here from both of these players. Really no weird shenanigans just yet. There's a quick expansion right here for INnoVation, and he's following it up with that very standard double Hellion production here in the earlier part of the game. There are a couple of go-to builds right now for the Zerg versus Terran matchup, and this is definitely one of them as well. Unsurprisingly, of course, INnoVation is going to execute it very, very cleanly, and I would be very surprised if he even misses a beat here in the earlier part of the game. Now, interestingly enough, he's going for a very quick third base. He's actually putting that command center right there at the front of the base. Now, this is something that I've seen a lot of players ask questions about. Why would you ever go ahead and put a command center as part of your wall? Here's the thing. This is a building that very rapidly generates HP, right? It very, very quickly generates a lot of hit points, meaning that it's going to be a hard building to bust. If your opponent has got Overlord speed done anyway, and he's a high-level player, like, for example, soO is, he's going to figure out that command center, whether or not it's at the front or whether or not it's in the main base. There's really no denying right there. And the nice thing about command centers, of course, is that they are very large buildings. So usually putting the command center in the, front of your bases may seem a little bit weird, but it actually plays out very, very nicely in the vast majority of the cases. Now, so far, a little bit of overextension right there, losing a couple of the Hellions, and really, of course, roasting a couple of Zerglings there in the process as well. But I really feel like INnoVation is not going to get the proper upper hand here. You can see that both of these players are still learning the map here, because INnoVation was making the assumption that he could escape through this little bit of a corridor, but of course, there were some debris there blocking his way. Now, these are going to be destructible, and even though he ended up losing a couple of Hellions there in the earlier part of the game, it really shouldn't be, that big of a deal. Although, so far, that does mean that soO is going to be allowed to drone up even greedier than he already has been doing. It's always very important when you're watching a professional match of SC2 that you keep in mind that production tab right there, as well as the amount of workers that both of the players have. Currently, it's 53 in favor, or 53 rather, in favor of the Zerg player. Gotta keep in mind, though, that very shortly, 3 mules will be dropping at once here, and there they are, hanging out right there in the natural. They're gonna, really even up that income tab there. So even though it may look like the Zerg is gonna be heavily in favor right now, you can see that the mules will indeed even out that income very, very quickly. 2 medevacs once again moving across the map here. This is a standard push that INnoVation does, even though it's a little bit odd here since he doesn't really have the double harassment here whatsoever anymore. He does still have the Viking on the other side of the map, just mostly doing some scouting here and trying to figure out what is going on. Now, this little push here, it's probably not really meant to do any damage, although if he does, do any critical damage, he's going to take it, of course. But most of the time, this is going to be to, force the Zerg player to not just be making drones. And so far, he seems to be doing a very good job at exactly that. A couple of the queens already getting picked off. And actually, this is exactly what I meant, right? Look at that. Beautiful target firing right there on the banelings as well. Dropping the Marines right on top of the banelings as well to try and pop them individually to do as little damage as possible. And while a couple of queens got picked off and a handful of banelings were killed as well, it's really just an eye for an eye so far. Neither player really pushing very far ahead here, and while this drop was going on, of course, INnoVation bought himself some time to macro up that third command center as well. Interestingly enough, he is taking the base right here on the low ground. This seems like the base that is a little bit easier to engage into. Because, of course, if you take control of this, watchtower in the top left corner of the map, you can see all of the movement here. But it looks like INnoVation has figured out a way to deal with run-bys, and he's just simply going to construct a wall on the top side of the third base right here. Now, a lot of players in the Zerg vs Terran matchup have, at the very least, been considering the Hydra base play a lot. I gotta be honest, I think that the Hydra Link Bane style is very powerful, but it may be due to the fact that this is a new map, that soO is opting to go for Mutalisk in this match instead. Here's the thing, right? Mutalisk did not get nerfed. Mutalisks did not become any weaker than they were in the past. It's just that the Hydra got buffed up a little, players started using it a lot more, and since the Widow Mines can be countered quite effectively with Hydra-based play, a lot of Zerg players have been opting to go for that one instead. Now hold that thought for just a second, because the Marines are indeed stemming forward, but I think that he's just simply going to pick up and indeed boost on out of there. But interestingly enough, I think that this may be due to the fact that this is a new map for the Zerg player here as well. He's opted to go for Mutalisk instead. By the way, this is probably my favorite war chest skin. The skin looks absolutely incredible. Is that just me? I mean, look at that thing. It looks absolutely awesome. It's got 4 wings now as well, even though they get holes in them, which seems very, very counterintuitive. They are still very powerful in the exact same unit. Just the skin right there. But anyway, the mutas are, of course, very good at picking up dropships and whatnot, right? And they're much better at controlling space. I actually also really like it against the, siege tank-based style here that the Terran player is going for. Now, even though, by the way, the Mutalisk was not directly nerfed itself, there was a slight buff to the Thor, which is the reason why INnoVation is immediately queuing up some of those units. He's going to try and see if he can get some of those out, because this not only forces the Zerg player to micro his Mutalisk in a very particular formation called Magic Boxing, that basically reduces the amount of splash damage that he will be taking on those mutas, but at the same time, it will also just simply make it hard for a Zerg to engage into a, stationed Terran player, because if you're going to deal with a Thor and a medevac and whatnot, you may just end up taking a whole lot of splash damage. So far, though, a couple of Marines moving across the map, and while the mutas are flying about, he's really not achieving a whole lot with them so far. Although this does, not really allow INnoVation to move across the map himself yet either. This is going to slow down the Zerg and the Terran player here alike. Gold base was taken right now for soO as well, and really both of these players are giving each other a ton of respect. I mean, you can see that neither of them really wants to take a risk, and since both of them are very comfortable with playing macro, they are just simply, you know, defaulting to that playstyle. If you see, you know, a super high level match, oftentimes you will see matches that end up somewhere along the lines of this in the earlier part of the game. I mean, 10 minutes have gone by and a couple of units have died, sure, but for the vast majority of this game, really not a whole lot has happened just yet. Oftentimes, versus weaker opponents in particular, players do play quite a bit more aggressive, just because they know they can eventually outproduce them. But this is almost like a sign of mutual respect. Now, both players getting very close to maxing out right now. Mutas, Zerglings, and Banelings will be forced to get out of there, and the Hive is done. So that means that the Ultralisk Cavern will now also be on the production tab. In the meantime, INnoVation has indeed secured himself another base here as well, going for that very quick 4th base and putting a planetary fortress on it as well. I really like this. Look at that, right? This is the center of the map in a way, right? If you manage to control this area, it's gonna control a lot of the pathways towards the Terran base as well. And with that siege tank, as well as the bunker and that wall of supply depots, this area on the top, or the bottom left-hand corner is going to be quite well protected. And then the center is going to be quite well protected as well. That means that you all of a sudden open up the opportunity to go for a gold base. Very nicely done there. Now, both players really just trading blows, right? Really trying to just simply, you know, outproduce each other and trying to make more stuff, but really they are just simply focusing on getting as many upgrades as possible, and both playing uncharacteristically passive right here in this match so far. Now, it looks like INnoVation may just barely give his opponent a bit of an edge here, engaging on the creep with the siege tanks in a bit of a funny position. Zerglings, Baneling, and Mutas are indeed moving forward, target firing down as many of those units as he can. Metavex are taking damage as well, but look at that. He's gonna, you know, back up into the planetary fortress here. Of course, planetary can be repaired. There are still a lot of Banelings available, however, and he is gonna go for the target firing right there. That it was a huge commitment right there by soO, blowing up the command center with just a handful of Banelings. A very, very expensive decision to make. And the question is, was that really worth his time? If he manages to, you know, hold on here for a little while longer, it's probably going to be worth it. But already the gold base was secured here by INnoVation. So even though that cost a lot of Banelings there, it really did not slow down the Terran's production whatsoever. Great decision making right there by INnoVation to go for that 5th command center earlier than you normally would. And I think that this is currently actually no, it has been scouted here by the Zerg player as well. Interestingly enough, he got that information very quickly. But regardless, this is still going to be a very strong defensive position as well. And I think that the main base indeed will now be evacuated towards that previous 4th base location. Now, not quite as defensive of a setup as previous, but still, this is going to be a very nice area to defend into, in particular with the planetary fortress right here at that gold base expansion. Meanwhile, on the other side of the map, we see soO, the Zerg player here, just simply also taking his entire side of the map. I mean, already, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bases here in total, with a couple of additional macro hatcheries as well. This is a map that allows for heavy macro play. Now, this becomes rather interesting right now for the Zerg, though. Playing a lot of Zerg versus Terran myself as well. From the Terran's perspective, if you know that the Zerg player is very well spread out, right? If you know that that is going to be the case, you can force them to move their army into separate little clumps. Because if you are caught with your entire army as the Zerg on one side of the map, you may end up taking a lot of damage. Now, once again, a couple of units do get caught here in the middle of the map. The Marines and the Thors, however, in the back will be able to do a lot of damage. At the same time, though, we do see that drop harass here as well on the right-hand side of the map. But the Thors are currently dealing so much damage here to these Ultralisks. Gotta be careful, though. I guess that INnoVation is currently preoccupied on the other side of the map, backing up into the safety of that planetary fortress, but dealing a lot of damage here while this is all going on. However, only 2 drones there ended up falling here by the... actually, that's not bad at all. soO only ended up losing 2 drones there in total. Very interesting. Now, we already do see that preemptive switch here towards the Corruptor. Corruptors, of course, very important, in particular against the Liberator production, which just started up here for the Terran player. And interestingly enough, I haven't really seen a whole lot of games like this. This is probably what StarCraft 2 is going to look like a couple of years from now. But interestingly enough, neither player is really significantly ahead at this point in the game. I mean, upgrades-wise, they are both at 3-3. They've both started, researching their air upgrades as well. They've got a lot of bases, they got a lot of economy, and really, while we've seen, that damage being dealt, it was really nothing more than an eye for an eye, right? Like, they were just simply trading blows left and right, and this is where we will probably start start seeing a little bit more of a ballsy move out here for the Terran player. He wants to make sure that the Zerg does not get that maxed out army out with all of the spellcasters, the ultras, and then potentially also, of course, the brute lords. But still, is he going to be able to do so? There are a lot of tight chokes on this map. However, not quite enough liberators available just yet to really zone this Zerg player out. A lot of those air units end up dying here as well, and while a couple of the corruptors there were engaging against the liberators, the marines will come in here for the rescue as well, and I think that those will be backed off here for the very least, or at the very least for right now. Now keep in mind, there's no planetary fortress right here on this base. The ultras are going to town, dealing a huge amount of damage, but at the same time, another dropship made its way across the map. Here's one at the gold base expansion as well, and both players once again taking equal amounts of damage. Look at that, 16 SCVs went down, 13 drones went down so far, but really at this point in the game, both players can just simply recreate those units very, very effectively. And although, this one Ultralisk was not capable of continuing onwards with this fight, I think that the gold base will end up falling here as well. It's really not that big of a deal. Look at that. It's 19 workers killed by the Zerg player, and 18 killed here, or I guess 19 right now as well, by the Terran player. That's absolutely crazy. Very, very even game here, going back and forth between all of these players. Still though, a lot of mules are of course being dropped. Speaking of a lot of mules that are being dropped, I think that INnoVation wants to get rid of this base ASAP. He wants to mine this one out, although, it's a nice central position to take. I think that he's rather, he's rather a little bit more mobile, rather than all of the pushes coming through this angle right here. But regardless, still, a ton of income will indeed be mined here, and look at that spike up there in the resource collection here for the Terran player. Liberators and Immortals, or rather not Immortals, Thors coming out right now here for the Terran player. Very focused here on these robotics units, or rather, not the robotics units, Lowko. Very focused right here on the Marauders as well. Apparently, I was assuming there that the Terran player all of a sudden switched to Protoss here, which would be very odd. But regardless, a very heavy focus right here on countering those Ultralisks. Now, here's the thing. There's going to be a lot of Infestors out, and a lot of the units here that are getting created right now for the Terran player are great against Ultras, but not so much against everything else here that the Zerg player has. I mean, Zerglings will be able to clean up the vast majority of this army just by themselves now that they have the Adrenal Glands upgrade as well as 3-3 research done. I don't think we're going to see a whole lot of Ultras here anymore, though, for the time being. I mean, a couple of them are indeed now running by towards that, base here that's already mined out for the Terran player, so INnoVation really doesn't really care about that all too much. At the same time, soO is trying to secure as many bases as he can, taking essentially every single, like, if you would draw a line, right, through the center of this map, I'm pretty sure you would be able to define this map quite easily, although I guess soO is starting to now move towards bases that are not quite supposed to be his. These ones are already quite contested right here, and I think that if this game goes on any longer, we may very well see all of the bases mined out in this game. Now, once again, though, INnoVation does not want it to get to that point. He's slow pushing right now with those Liberators and Thors. Very nicely done, but there are so many Corruptors here, he's got to be careful. There's going to be a lot of room here, however. The Liberators are once again moving in. Ultras coming here from the back as well. A lot of nice damage is being dealt here from both sides. Corruptors now taking the damage as well to those Liberators, but at the same time, the bio on the ground as well as the Thors cleaned up every single last of these remaining units. Is there enough anti-air available, however? It doesn't look like that is going to be quite the case, but at the same time, though, with this Marauder army left over, as long as this one Ultralisk ends up falling, I think that the Queens may end up dying here as well. There are still going to be a few Infestors on the ground, and while they, of course, did a nice bit of damage there earlier, it looks like INnoVation is just going to try and sacrifice his army right now, knowing that reinforcing Zerglings will shortly join these units as well, and that means that they will end up, not being able to retreat anyway. Taking positions right there, though, to the right-hand side of these mineral patches does make it rather difficult for the Zerg player to clean it up, but eventually, I think that that engagement went quite heavily in favor of the Zerg, because the Liberator count was halted quite nicely. At the same time, though, INnoVation is just simply securing more and more bases on this side of the map as well. He is forced to move his SCVs over, though. It's obviously one of the downsides to having those ground units called mules mining all these mineral patches so very quickly. You do run out of bases rather rapidly as well. Regardless, though, INnoVation will be able to hold this counterattack here from the Zerg quite nicely. Both players still very close to being maxed out, and while there's a bit of a chase here, he's got to be careful because he does not currently know where all of these infestors are located. And at the same time, soO is just continuing the mining right now on all of these remote bases. Even though the drops are going on all over the place, right? Then the Terran is doing a good job at denying some of that, income from the Zerg. So far, he's not really been able to pick up any significant drone kills. And while, 29 workers were killed in total, at this point in the game, it's very easy to remake them. Once again, a massive engagement here. Corruptors are going to town on all of those liberators. Fungal growths will indeed slow down the advancement right here as well. Beautiful play here by soO, but INnoVation, like I said, INnoVation is known for having a lot of stuff. He does exactly that. Somehow, some way, he was ahead there in the supply counts, even though he just took a massive hit, and INnoVation will be able to clean this last Ultralisk up as well, I'm assuming. There we go. The Ultralisk does get sliced in two, and that means that that base on the right-hand side will once again be in a little bit of trouble. INnoVation is going to continue onwards with their harassment. There are going to be a few spore crawlers nearby that will make this a little trickier, meaning that these Marines and, of course, the Marauders are essentially dead meat, but still, that was a beautiful play there by the blue Terran player. But the question is, was it not a little bit too late? soO was already maxed out for a little while. He was setting up a very nice bank. Sure, he's losing workers left and right, but at this point, look at the income that he's already got, right? He's got 2,500 resources. Well, I just spent a bunch of that, but he got a whole lot of resources just simply sitting in the bank, and he can remax at every single moment that he wants to. Now, cute little move there, actually, by the Zerg player. He's trying to get more gas income, I think. He doesn't really want to spend all his money on... he's actually not mining that much gas. He's really not getting all that much gas income here, interestingly enough. But regardless, soO does not want to be building, mineral-based units right now. You can see that he's desperately trying to add on banelings here as well as a bunch more drones. But really, he's being very careful here with maxing out. He wants to max out on some higher gas units here instead. The gold base right now taken here as well in the center of the map, and the same can be said right here on the other side. soO is just simply taking bases. He's just simply throwing hatcheries at a wall, and he's trying to see what sticks. It's quite smart, right? You basically just try and take every base on the map and sure your opponent will cancel, force to cancel maybe 2 or 3 of them. But if you manage to make 5, right? If you still keep a couple of them alive, you're still going to be a happy Zerg player. And if you got money in the bank, you can make little decisions like that quite comfortably. So this one will likely get forced to cancel. This one will probably get forced to get cancelled right here. At the very least, I'm thinking soO will do so. Nope, that's going to be a kill. But at the same time, though, the one here at the gold base location will be secured, at the very least for the time being. Now, creep is still being pushed across the map here as well. Once again, though, the Terran player is now engaging here on the right-hand side of the map, and this must be getting rather annoying. I mean, you can't really defend both the left-hand side and the right-hand side very easily without splitting up your army, right? So this Liberator is going to be very annoying because while the, majority of the Zerg army is going to be occupied here on the right-hand side of the map, this Liberator is going to be able to pick up a couple of kills and halt that production for a little while longer. It does look, however, that we're setting up for a big push here very shortly once again. INnoVation is out on the map. He's got a lot of Liberators once more. The question is there going to be enough? Marines and Marauders are engaging several different bases at once, and this is beautifully done here by the Terran player, making a very scary move here. Sure, he's occupying the majority of his army, but he's popping bases on the right-hand side as well as the left-hand side of the map. Question is he not giving up a bit too much army supply in order to get this done? Sure, he's slowing down the Zerg player, right? A couple of these bases do indeed end up dying, but there's still so much production here for the red player. I mean, apparently these Zerglings really dislike that one spore crawler in particular, and they did like those Marauders hitting at the hatchery for a little while. I think there was a slight little error, but regardless, I mean, these bases just simply get retaken. The drones get relocated to different places for a while longer, and with a map this size, and if a Zerg player takes this many bases, it's very, very hard to stop him. 2 medevacs, though, once again full of units, are setting themselves up here to snipe that lowered hatchery here in just a little bit when the Zerg is going to be preoccupied. Another base is taken, however, here by the Zerg player in red, and he is just simply getting as much value here as possible. Gotta hand it to INnoVation, though, making ballsy moves like that, recognizing that he's not in the strongest position, taking risks to try and slow down that Zerg's economy even 20+ minutes into the game. At the same time, though, look at this setup here. The Terran is mining off of a ton of bases, really securing the entire, bottom half of the map, doing a magnificent job at exactly that. But how are are you gonna kill? How are you gonna kill a Zerg player that is on a, you know, 8, 9, 10 base economy, right? How are you gonna kill that? Because when you kill one base, another one will get taken, and more than likely two as well. Marines and Marauders, once again, though, pushing up that ramp right now. At the same time, we see 2 Marines and 2 Marauders making their way to the left-hand side of the map as well. Couple of Marines and Marauders now also caught here, a little bit below their brothers, who are now currently getting killed. But it does mean that while a couple of units get sacrificed, the bases here on the right-hand side of the map are once again vulnerable. Ultralisk are trying to advance onwards, but now they've realized that they really need to move to the right-hand side instead. Great target firing right there by INnoVation, popping every single last of these banelings for essentially free, and that means that this base will once again end up falling. And while the Zerg is preoccupied here on the right-hand side of the map, INnoVation is pushing on the left. Beautiful plays here by INnoVation. This is what makes him so powerful. Even though he's behind, he is not having the biggest bank compared to his opponent. He still has a menacing force. He's still maxed out on upgrades. He's still harassing to the best of his abilities. Great choke here as well for INnoVation to be fighting into. The Ultralisk are coming, however, from the side right now as well. And while these Marines and Marauders end up dying, 2 more bases will go here in favor of the Terran player. There are going to be a lot of Liberators. I love this positioning. Look at that. These missile turrets and Liberators being so very menacing. Is there not just simply too much Zerg, though? I think that these Terran units will be forced to evacuate themselves back towards the safety of this home base, because even though this nice and transposition was indeed taken care of, that immediately means as well that these 2 bases in the, you know, southern part of the map are immediately preoccupied as well, and they need to get defended here. Terran, however, is cleaning up a lot of attacking drones and Zerglings as well. At the same time, though, Zerg is taking down a couple of these command centers. One of the planetary fortresses ends up dying. Command center right here is currently burning out as well, and these players are neck and neck. An eye for an eye, most definitely. Even, you know, 25 minutes into the game, they are still trading very, very evenly, and both of them are at a similar amount of supply and a similar amount of income as well. What a great game! Man, this is a really sick game. Can you only imagine how hard it is to play? I mean, I haven't really been paying attention to the amount of APM that these guys have had, but look at that. soO is averaging almost 400 actions a minute, and while INnoVation is a little bit lower than that, he will most definitely spike up to like 700, 800, maybe even more actions a minute during these big, intense battles. Crazy, crazy, crazy high level play. Managing this much stuff and like controlling your opponent this much, and, you know, trying to be in your opponent's head and dealing, you know, with all of the potential aggression as well. It's extremely hard to do, and really, like, this is looking like a solid map. I mean, I haven't played any games myself yet on Sky Garden. I've only seen a handful of, you know, matches on this map, but it's incredibly solid from what I've seen so far. Now, this may very well be a bit of a Zerg favorite map, though, just because of the amount of bases here. I think that if that wasn't the case, soO would have been playing quite a bit more aggressive so far, but since he knows that eventually the Terran player will be, you know, mined out, he's just simply sitting back, biding his time, and making that big, big army. Now, soO's bank, though, has sort of been emptied. I mean, he's got some money left over, and INnoVation is not quite mined out just yet. But the bank that he had earlier that was very solid now is starting to run very, very low. At the same time, if an Ultralisk once again ends up dying, I mean, these are not cheap units. A Baneling's right there as well, getting, or a Baneling right there as well, getting target fired down. And, you know, while a Medevac or 2 ended up dying, I think that still is going to be a solid trade here for the blue Terran. I have no clue who's actually going to be able to obtain this victory right here. This is going to get very close very quickly. INnoVation has still got a menacing force. He's backing up to the safety of those Liberators. If the Liberators can gun down some of these Ultras, they manage to deal a lot of damage to them. That means that the rest of this Terran army can just simply clean up the majority of this stuff. At the same time, though, if the Corruptors manage to get on top of all of these Liberators and they take them out before the Ultralisk fall, this could definitely go either way. Engaging on top of a planetary fortress, I don't think that is what you want to do if you're the Zerg player right now. Great baiting right there by INnoVation, and INnoVation all of a sudden for the first time in a long time ahead in the supply count. There is an infestor right there. It does get scanned, rather, and it does get picked up. INnoVation is smelling blood. He's gonna try and see if he can obtain the victory right here, right now. A lot of Liberator stows still available. The Queens are going for those transfuses. Liberators are indeed being picked off, however, by all of those Corruptors. Thors are trying to deal the splash damage here as well, going after both the Ultras as well as all of those corruptors. Question is there going to be enough Terran left over? The bank that soO had, that had thousands of resources in it earlier, is completely depleted. There are still, however, a lot of reinforcing Zerglings coming in, and still a lot of mining bases as well, whereas the Terran player is essentially stuck on one base with 33 workers right now. The rocks do get demolished as well. The Ultralisk gets around it, and I think that soO has just barely done it in an extremely close game where both players are just taking turns in damage right here. If this army gets cleaned up, I think that soO has got it in the bag. Thing is, though, there's still a lot of Terran army here. However, the Corruptors are currently taking care of all of those Liberators, and that means that the Ultras are that much scarier to be dealing with. You can't micro back towards that corner indefinitely here. If you're the Terran player, only 110 supply remaining here for INnoVation. soO is still close to maxed out, and while a lot of that supply is currently tied up in Corruptors, that means that the Ultras just simply become more and more powerful, and INnoVation is forced to GG out. What an epic, epic game. I really hope you enjoyed watching this. This is essentially as good as it gets right now for the Zerg vs Terran matchup. I mean, I can imagine this is quite frustrating if you are a Terran player, but at the same time, you gotta hand it to soO for playing it this smartly, right? He could have made an aggressive move, right? He was maxed out, he was maxed on upgrades, he had a huge amount of money in the bank, and I think that the average Zerg player would have moved across the map at that point. But instead, he was giving the Terran player time here to just simply, you know, accumulate a lot of resources as well, knowing that he's going to be able to take those fights just barely cost efficiently and therefore edge out a victory over time, as long as he could deny the bases in the center and the bottom right hand corner of the map. Really, really well done here by soO. Great match for sure. If you haven't already, make sure you hit that like button down below because it does help me out a lot. And while you're at it, make sure you subscribe as well so you get a notification as soon as I upload more, because I am indeed uploading pretty much every single day. For now, however, I want to thank you for watching. Have an amazing day, okay? Do not forget to smile, and I'll see you in the next one.